Here's what you need to know about my in-laws. They questioned my son's DNA over Christmas dinner dessert. Not in private, not through a lawyer, not even with the basic decency of waiting until the child left the room. My father-in-law just set down his wine glass, looked at David, my 8-year-old, who was still deciding between pumpkin pie and apple, and said, "We'll need genetic testing before we can consider him part of the family trust." Part of the family trust. Like my son was a stock option, a line item, a questionable investment. I remember the exact moment David's face changed, the way his little hand froze halfway to his fork, the way he looked at me with those wide, confused eyes that ask a question I never thought I'd have to answer. "Mom, don't they want me?" I didn't argue, didn't defend, didn't give them the satisfaction of tears. I just smiled, the kind of smile that should have warned them, and said, "Noted." 1 week later, their attorney called with news that made my mother-in-law's Botox actually crack. Turns out, when you gamble with a child's heart, sometimes you lose everything. People always ask me when I knew my marriage would be difficult. Was it the engagement, when Patricia insisted on rewriting our vows? The wedding, when she wore white and stood in the family photos like she was the bride? The hospital, when David was born, and she asked the nurse, loud enough for me to hear, whether they'd done a paternity panel? No. I knew I'd married into psychological warfare the first time I watched my mother-in-law smile at my son with her mouth while her eyes stayed cold as January. That Christmas, though, that was the night the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The house looked like something from Architectural Digest's holiday issue, all crystalline elegance and old money restraint. Deep burgundy walls, ancestor portraits in gilded frames watching us like a jury, and a dining table set with china so expensive you could probably hear it judging you. The air should have been warm with cinnamon and pine. Instead, it was refrigerated with decades of inherited cruelty. Patricia sat at the head of the table in a dress that cost more than our mortgage, every blonde hair shellacked into submission, every movement precise and deliberate. She wasn't just hosting dinner, she was presiding over court. Richard carved the turkey like he was performing surgery, or perhaps an autopsy, while making pointed comments about family bloodlines and maintaining standards. And there was David, my beautiful, gentle boy in his little burgundy vest, the one I'd bought special for this dinner, hoping maybe this year would be different. He sat with his back straight, hands folded, barely touching his food, trying so desperately to be good enough, trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces were never meant to fit him in the first place. In the corner, Beatrice's portrait watched everything with knowing eyes. Wilson's grandmother, the family matriarch, the woman's approval Patricia had spent 40 years chasing and never quite catching. If only I'd known then what that painting had witnessed. I should have seen it coming, should have grabbed David's hand the moment we walked through those doors and felt the temperature drop. Should have trusted my gut when Patricia's smile stretched too tight, when Richard's questions got too pointed, when Wilson's brother Timothy wouldn't meet my eyes. But you don't expect your family to nuke your entire life between the butter rolls and the cranberry sauce. You don't expect Christmas dinner to become a deposition. And you really don't expect your in-laws to look at your child, at their own grandchild, and decide his worth was up for debate. But that's exactly what happened. And what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that their little genetic fishing expedition was about to cost them absolutely everything. If you've ever dealt with toxic in-laws or family members who made you feel like you had to prove your worth, hit that like button right now. Patricia and Richard are about to learn that greed has consequences, and trust me, the karma is chef's kiss. Subscribe so you don't miss how this plays out. Drop a comment telling me your own in-law horror story, and turn on notifications because stories like this, they need to be heard. Let's go. The thing about expensive crystal is that it amplifies sound. Every clink of fork against plate, every forced laugh, every pointed silence, it all echoed through that dining room like we were performing for an audience of ghosts. Wilson's brother Timothy and his wife Vanessa had arrived early with their twins, Sophie and Noah, who were immediately engulfed in Patricia's arms like she'd been separated from them for years instead of weeks. The kids were 7, a year younger than David, and within 5 minutes of arriving, they'd been handed elaborately wrapped presents that Patricia just couldn't wait to give them. Sophie got an American Girl doll, the expensive kind with the historically accurate outfit and the matching book set. Noah got a remote-controlled helicopter that probably cost more than my car payment. David got nothing. "We'll do gifts after dinner, darling," Patricia had said, patting his head like he was a neighbor's dog, the kind of pat that's technically affectionate but somehow makes you feel dismissed. I watched my son's face try to arrange itself into something that looked like he didn't care. Dinner was the usual performance. Patricia held court, directing conversation like a conductor, making sure every topic somehow circled back to Timothy's promotion, Vanessa's charity work, or the twins' academic achievements. When Wilson tried to mention David's award for his science project, Patricia made a small humming sound and immediately pivoted to asking Richard about the stock market. David ate his turkey in careful, quiet bites. He'd learned years ago that the less space he took up, the less likely he was to be criticized. "David, sweetheart, use your napkin," Patricia said. Even though he hadn't made a mess, we do have standards at this table. The twins, meanwhile, were allowed to talk over each other, gesture wildly with their forks, and basically exist with the confident messiness of children who'd never been told their presence was conditional. Then came the gifts. Patricia disappeared and returned with a small stack of presents. Sophie and Noah received more toys, building sets, art supplies, gift cards. David received a single package wrapped in leftover birthday paper that had a visible crease down the middle. He opened it carefully, like maybe if he was respectful enough about it, the contents would transform into something that matched the excitement on his cousins' faces. It was a book, used, the kind you find at a library sale with someone else's name written in faded marker on the inside cover. The Chronicles of Narnia, which would have been thoughtful except David had owned the complete set since he was 6. "It's about learning to appreciate what you have," Patricia said, watching him with those sharp eyes. "Not everything has to be new, does it?" David looked at me. I watched him swallow whatever he was feeling and force his mouth into a smile. "Thank you, Grandma," he said quietly. That's when I felt Wilson's hand find mine under the table, a squeeze that said, "I know. I see it too. Just get through this." But we didn't get through it. Dessert arrived, Patricia's famous trifle and a selection of pies that probably took days to perfect. Richard poured himself another scotch, his 3rd or 4th, I'd lost count. The conversation had moved to inheritance planning, of all things, with Timothy nodding along like he was in a business meeting instead of a family dinner. "Beatrice has been making some changes to her estate plan," Patricia said, her voice casual in that way that meant she was anything but, "wanting to ensure everything goes to the right people, the legitimate heirs." The word hung in the air like smoke. Wilson went very still beside me. "Mother, what are you—" "I'm just saying," Patricia continued, setting down her wine glass with deliberate precision, "that before any official documents are signed, before anyone is included in family trusts or inheritance plans, we need to be absolutely certain about bloodlines." Richard leaned back in his chair, looking at David with the kind of appraisal you'd give a used car you suspect has been in an accident. "We'll need a DNA test for the boy before things get too complicated." The room went silent except for the crackling fire. David's fork clattered against his plate. His face God, his face went through confusion, hurt, and then something worse. The terrible understanding that he was the problem being discussed. "Excuse me?" Wilson's voice was ice. "It's just a formality," Patricia said, smiling that terrible smile. "Surely you understand. We need to be sure he belongs with us before Beatrice includes him in any legal documents. It's just good sense." "He's 8 years old," I heard myself say. My voice sounded far away, calm, in a way that scared even me. "Which is why we're being honest," Richard said, like honesty was something they had invented. "Boys should know the truth matters." David's eyes filled with tears he was too proud to let fall. His hands were shaking. I stood up. The chair scraped against the hardwood loud enough for everyone to flinch. "Wilson, David, we're leaving." "Ellen, don't be dramatic," Patricia started. "Get your coat, baby," I said to David, my hand already on his shoulder. Wilson was on his feet, his face a color I'd never seen before. "You just, in front of him? You actually just—" "We're protecting the family assets," Richard said. "You'd do the same." I turned back at the doorway, David's coat in my hands, my son pressed against my side. "No," I said. "We really wouldn't." The door closed behind us on Patricia's outraged voice and Timothy's awkward attempts at peacemaking. In the car, David finally broke, sobbing against my shoulder while Wilson sat frozen in the driver's seat, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "Why don't they love me?" David whispered. And I had no answer that wouldn't break us all. The drive home that night was 23 minutes of silence, broken only by David's occasional hiccup sobs from the back seat. 23 minutes for 8 years of willful blindness to crystallize into perfect, devastating clarity. "They've always been like this," Wilson said finally, his voice hollow. "I just didn't want to see it." But that wasn't quite true. He'd seen it. We'd both seen it. We'd just been expertly trained to call it something else. When we first started dating, Wilson had warned me his parents were traditional, which I'd interpreted as old-fashioned, maybe a bit formal, but kind of people who used cloth napkins and said pardon instead of what. It took me exactly one Sunday dinner to realize that traditional was code for we'll judge everything about you and find it wanting. Patricia had looked at my Target dress and smiled with all her teeth. How refreshingly unpretentious. Richard had asked what my father did for a living, then made a small noise when I said he was a high school teacher. Not disapproval exactly, just acknowledgement that I'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "They just need time to warm up to people," Wilson had said in the car afterward. "They were the same way with Vanessa at first." Except they hadn't been. I'd seen the photos. Vanessa at her first family Christmas, smiling in a designer dress that matched Patricia's, already positioned at the center of the family portrait like she'd always belonged there. But I'd believed Wilson because I wanted to believe him, because traditional sounded temporary, fixable. Then I got pregnant. The engagement had been quick. Too quick by Patricia's standards, though she'd phrased it as concern about us rushing into things. But once David was on the way, she'd shifted into planning mode, taking over our wedding with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate takeover. Nothing I wanted made it into the final ceremony. Not the wildflowers, not the casual venue, not the playlist I'd spent weeks curating. "Family weddings have certain expectations," Patricia had said, holding up 2 fabric swatches that looked identical to me. "We wouldn't want people talking." People. As if there was an invisible audience judging our every choice. As if their approval was oxygen and we were slowly suffocating without it. David was born on a Tuesday in October. 8 pounds of perfect, screaming proof that love could exist without conditions. I'd been naive enough to think a grandchild would soften Patricia's edges. Instead, she'd arrived at the hospital with an overnight bag and immediately started rearranging the room. "You're holding him wrong," she'd told me within the first hour. "That's not how Hastings babies are held." There was apparently a Hastings way to do everything, to swaddle, to feed, to schedule naps, none of which I was doing correctly. "She's just trying to help," Wilson would say, exhausted from work and too tired to fight. "That's how she shows love." Was it? Because from where I stood, it looked a lot like control wearing Love's face mask. The exclusions started small. David's first birthday, just immediate family, Patricia had insisted, which somehow included Vanessa's parents, but not mine. David's second Christmas, when the photo cards went out featuring Timothy and his family in matching sweaters, while David appeared in exactly one picture, slightly out of focus in the background. "They probably just didn't get a good shot of him," Wilson had said, studying the card with a frown. But there had been 50 photos taken that day, I'd counted. In 47 of them, David had been carefully positioned at the edge of the frame or cropped out entirely. By the time David was 4, I'd started keeping a mental list. Not because I wanted to, because I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. David not invited to Sophie and Noah's birthday parties. "Oh, didn't we mention it? It was just a small thing." David receiving a $3 coloring book while his cousins unwrapped iPads. Patricia's careful comments. "He doesn't really look like Wilson at this age, does he? And such an interesting nose. Must be from your side of the family." And my personal favorite, delivered with a sympathetic smile, "Some children are just late bloomers intellectually." David had been reading chapter books at 5, but that apparently didn't count. The worst part wasn't the exclusion. It was the gaslighting that came with it. "You're being oversensitive," Wilson would say when I brought it up. Not angry, just tired of hearing it. "My parents are just awkward with kids. They were the same way with me at first." "Are you sure you're not projecting?" Patricia had asked once, catching me watching her fuss over the twins while David sat alone with his discount store toy. "I treat all my grandchildren exactly the same." And I'd started to doubt myself, started wondering if I was manufacturing drama, seeing patterns where none existed. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe my resentment toward Patricia was coloring everything else. Maybe I was one of those terrible daughter-in-laws who cause family rifts over imaginary slights. Except the slights weren't imaginary. They were just small enough to deny, subtle enough to dismiss, delivered with enough plausible deniability that calling them out made me look paranoid. Until tonight, when Richard had said the quiet part loud. "I should have protected him," Wilson said now, pulling into our driveway. His hands were still shaking. 8 years old, and he just learned that some people's love came with terms and conditions, that family could be a contract you failed to fulfill. I thought about all those years of traditional and set in their ways and just trying to help, all those careful euphemisms that let cruelty hide in plain sight. "Yeah," I said softly, "you should have." The next morning, Wilson sat at our kitchen table with his laptop open and his jaw set in a way I'd never seen before. He'd been up since 5, I could tell. The coffee pot was empty and there were 2 mugs in the sink, his telltale sign of insomnia and decision-making. "I'm canceling the transfer," he said without looking up. I was still in my robe, my eyes gritty from a night of intermittent sleep punctuated by the sound of David crying in his room. "What transfer?" "The $300 every month for their expenses." He said the word like it tasted rotten. "I've been sending it since we got married. Dad said it was what sons did, helping family." $300 a month for 8 years. Nearly $30,000 to people who lived in a house worth over $1 million and drove cars that cost more than our annual salary. "They told you they needed it?" "They told me it was about respect, about honoring your parents." His laugh was sharp and humorless. I was so goddamn stupid. He clicked something on the screen with enough force that I worried for the mouse. Done. Canceled. They can figure out their own expenses. The phone started ringing 20 minutes later. Patricia's number flashed on the screen. Wilson stared at it until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. By the fourth call, I reached over and turned the ringer off. The voicemails started coming in rapid succession. I watched the notifications pile up like evidence. Patricia's voice tight with barely controlled panic. Richard's growing increasingly aggressive. Wilson, we need to discuss what happened. You're being incredibly immature about this. Your mother is very upset. Call us immediately. This is ridiculous. We were only trying to help. You're punishing us for looking out for the family's interests. If you think you can just cut us off, you're mistaken. We have lawyers, son. Don't forget that. Lawyers? Over $300 a month? The threat would have been laughable if it wasn't so pathetic. David emerged from his room around 10, his eyes puffy and red. He'd heard everything last night. Kids always do, no matter how quietly you think you're talking. He climbed into Wilson's lap without a word, and Wilson held him like he was trying to shield him from something that had already happened. Am I really their grandson? David asked, his voice small. Wilson's arms tightened around him. You are my son. That's the only thing that matters. But why did they... Because they're broken, buddy. Some people are just broken in ways that make them hurt other people. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. And sometimes honest is all you have. The call from Timothy came that afternoon. Wilson almost didn't answer it. His brother's name on the screen was just another reminder of the family that had spent 8 years telling us we weren't quite good enough. But something made him pick up. I need to tell you something, Timothy said without preamble. I could hear him through the speaker, his voice strained. Vanessa's been on me all night. She said I have to tell you, that I should have told you before. Wilson's face went very still. Tell me what? It's about Grandma Beatrice and the estate. The story came out in fragments, Timothy's guilt making him trip over words. 3 weeks ago, Beatrice had called Patricia to inform her that she was updating her will. Nothing dramatic, just small adjustments. She wanted to include David in the trust, give him the same provision she was leaving for Sophie and Noah. $25,000, to be held until he turned 25. A gesture, a way of saying he mattered. Patricia had apparently received this news the way most people receive a cancer diagnosis. Mom went ballistic. I mean, completely lost it. Started talking about how Grandma Beatrice was being manipulated, how you and Ellen were probably putting ideas in her head. She was convinced that if David got written into the will, it would set a precedent, that Grandma might give him more later, might even leave him the house. The house she and Dad live in, Wilson said slowly. Yeah. The house that doesn't belong to them. They've always just assumed, Timothy trailed off. Look, I know how it sounds, but Mom's been counting on that inheritance since Dad retired early. They've been living beyond their means for years, banking on Grandma's estate to bail them out. The DNA test, the public humiliation, the cruelty delivered right in front of David. It had all been calculated. A strategy. Patricia had orchestrated the entire Christmas dinner disaster to create doubt, to poison the relationship between Beatrice and David before the will could be changed. She thought if she questioned his paternity, if she made a big enough scene, Grandma would reconsider, would leave David out to avoid family drama. I didn't know she was going to do it like that, in front of him. Jesus, Wilson, I didn't know that. But you knew something. Silence. Which wasn't answer enough. Vanessa wanted to warn you. I told her not to get involved, that it was between Mom and Grandma. Another pause. I'm sorry. I should have said something. I just didn't think she'd actually use my 8-year-old son as collateral damage. Wilson's voice was ice. Yeah, hard to predict that one. After he hung up, Wilson sat with his head in his hands for a long time. I watched him process it, all of it. Every Christmas, every excluded birthday, every small cruelty that we'd rationalized away. It hadn't been awkwardness or generational difference or being traditional. It had been greed dressed up in grandparent clothes. $25,000, Wilson said finally. They were willing to traumatize David over $25,000 that wasn't even theirs to lose. I thought about Patricia's designer clothes and Richard's Scotch collection and the monthly payments they'd convinced Wilson were about respect. I thought about David's face when he opened that used book. The careful way he tried to earn love that should have been freely given. What do we do now? I asked. Wilson's phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from his mother, no doubt. Another threat disguised as concern. He looked at it for a moment, then back at me. When he spoke, his voice was steady, in a way that promised action. Now, we make sure they never get the chance to hurt him again. The letter arrived by courier on a Tuesday. Elegant cream stationery with a law firm's embossed letterhead. Whitmore and Associates requested our presence through a meeting regarding the estate of Beatrice Hastings, this Friday at 2 o'clock. The word urgent appeared twice. Wilson stared at it like it might explode. She's 91, he said quietly. What if something's wrong? What if the stress from Christmas? Don't, I said, taking his hand. Don't let them make you feel guilty for protecting your son. But the worry sat heavy in both our stomachs for the next 3 days. The law office occupied the top floor of a building downtown that probably cost more per month than our mortgage. All dark wood and leather chairs, and the kind of quiet that money buys. A receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine led us to a conference room with windows overlooking the city. Beatrice was already there. At 91, she was still the kind of woman who made you sit up straighter without saying a word. Steel gray hair in a perfect chignon, a navy suit that probably cost more than our car, and eyes sharp enough to perform surgery. She looked at Wilson with such naked affection that I saw his shoulders relax slightly. Grandmother, he started, but she held up one hand. Sit, both of you. Not unkind, but absolute. We have things to discuss. Her attorney, a man named Gregory Whitmore, who looked like he'd been practicing law since the Constitution was signed, opened a leather portfolio. Beatrice waved him off. I'll handle this part, Gregory. You can do the boring bits later. She turned those sharp eyes on us. I was there, you know. Christmas dinner. Wilson went very still. What? Not physically. Don't be dense, darling. It doesn't suit you. She smiled, thin and knowing. Patricia invited me, as she does every year, and as I do every year, I declined. But I had young Mrs. Chen from next door drop off my gifts that evening. She arrived just as your father was making his little speech about DNA tests and family bloodlines. Mrs. Chen, Patricia's neighbor, the one who'd been trying to befriend her for years and getting nowhere. She called me immediately, bless her, gave me quite a detailed account. Beatrice's expression could have frozen fire. Apparently my grandson, my great-grandson, was reduced to tears at the dinner table while his grandparents questioned his legitimacy in front of witnesses, in front of the child himself. Grandmother, I'm so sorry. For what? Her voice cracked like a whip. You removed your family from a toxic situation. That's called parenting, Wilson, something your mother never quite mastered. She reached for a glass of water, her hand steadier than mine would have been. Patricia has been attempting to manipulate me for 43 years. Since the day she married your father, she's been calculating net worth and positioning herself for inheritance. Do you know she once suggested I might be more comfortable in a nursing home when I was 72 and in perfect health? Wilson's face was carefully blank, but I could see him processing, recalibrating every memory through this new lens. She's been living in my house for 15 years, the Riverside estate. 4 bedrooms, 3 acres, worth approximately $1.8 million. She's redecorated it twice, treats it like her personal showcase, and has somehow convinced your father that they own it. They do not. They have never owned it. Gregory cleared his throat gently. Mrs. Hastings, perhaps we should... I'm getting there, Gregory. Don't rush me. She looked at Wilson, and her expression softened slightly. When I told Patricia I was adding David to my will, a modest provision, nothing that would impact her eventual inheritance, she revealed exactly who she is. Called me that very evening, suggested that perhaps I was being misled about David's paternity, that she had concerns about his legitimacy. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I told her she was being ridiculous. She told me I was being naive. We had quite a conversation. Beatrice's smile was razor sharp. I've spent the last 3 weeks having my attorney review everything, every asset, every provision, every clause. And I've made some changes. Gregory opened his portfolio. All business now. Mrs. Hastings' estate is currently valued at approximately $4.2 million. This includes the Riverside property, a portfolio of investments, several smaller real estate holdings, and various accounts. $4.2 million. I watched Wilson try to process the number. Under the previous will, Gregory continued, the estate was to be divided between Richard and his brother, Wilson's uncle James, with smaller provisions for grandchildren. Patricia and Richard were granted lifetime residence at Riverside. Were granted. Past tense. Note that, Wilson. Gregory's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile I'd seen from him. Under the new will, effective immediately and irrevocable as of this morning, the entire estate passes into a trust. Wilson is named as trustee. The beneficiaries are Wilson and David in equal shares. Patricia and Richard are removed entirely. The words landed like bombs. The Riverside estate, Beatrice said, each word deliberate, will be transferred to the trust within 60 days. Patricia and Richard will be given notice to vacate. I've been more than generous. I'm giving them 2 months to find alternative housing. Grandmother, you don't have to, don't I? Her eyes flashed. They used my great-grandson as a pawn. They publicly humiliated him in an attempt to manipulate my estate planning. They've been bleeding your finances for years while living in my house rent-free. What exactly do I owe them, Wilson? He had no answer. Your Uncle James is getting a small stipend. He's never asked me for anything, so he'll receive something. Timothy and his family are provided for through other means. But the bulk of it, she gestured to the documents Gregory was sliding across the table, goes to the people who actually deserve it. To my grandson, who finally found his spine, and to my great-grandson, who should never have had to question whether he belonged. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. Wilson's hand found mine under the table. Real family doesn't demand proof. Real family doesn't need it. David is my great-grandson because you are my grandson. That's how family works. Or at least that's how it should work. She stood, still elegant, still composed. Gregory will handle the details, sign the papers, review everything. Take your time. She looked at Wilson with something fierce and proud in her eyes. And Wilson, when Patricia calls, and she will call, I have your permission to tell her exactly where she can direct her concerns. As she moved toward the door, she paused beside me, one hand briefly touching my shoulder. Take care of that boy. He's got good people now. Make sure he knows it. After she left, Wilson and I sat in stunned silence, staring at documents that represented more money than we'd see in 3 lifetimes. Documents that meant Patricia and Richard were about to lose everything they'd taken for granted. She called it irrevocable, Wilson finally said. Gregory nodded. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Mrs. Hastings doesn't believe in second-guessing herself. Wilson started laughing. Not happy laughter, something darker, edged with 8 years of suppressed anger finally finding release. $4 million, he said. They tried to destroy my son over 25,000, and they lost 4 million. The math of karma, I thought, was beautifully precise. The eviction notice was delivered to Patricia and Richard on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, our phones started ringing. It didn't stop for 3 days. Patricia called 17 times in the first 24 hours alone. When we didn't answer, she left voicemails that evolved from wounded confusion to righteous indignation to something that sounded dangerously close to begging. Richard's messages were different. Clipped, angry, threatening legal action one minute and family loyalty the next. This is what you do to your parents after everything we've done for you? Your grandmother is clearly being manipulated. She's 91, Wilson. This isn't legal. We can work this out. Family doesn't abandon family. The irony of that last one would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. Thursday morning, they showed up at our house. I saw them through the front window. Patricia had a designer coat that probably cost more than the rent on whatever apartment they'd need to find. Richard beside her, looking like a man who just realized he'd bet on the wrong horse. I locked the door and closed the blinds. They rang the doorbell 15 times before finally leaving. The emails started that afternoon. Walls of text, desperation dressed up as reason. Patricia's were master classes in manipulation. We only wanted what was best for David. Surely you can see we were trying to protect the family. Your grandmother is making a terrible mistake in her old age. Think of David, how confused he must be. Always circling back to David, as if they'd suddenly discovered grandparent feelings now that their financial future was in ruins. They're panicking, Wilson said, scrolling through his phone with grim satisfaction. Good. But I had a different kind of insurance in mind. The DNA test kit arrived Friday morning, discreet packaging from a company that promised 99.9% accuracy and results in 5 business days. Wilson watched me swab David's cheek and then his own, his expression hovering between confusion and understanding. You know he's mine, he said quietly. I know, but they don't get to question it without proof shoving their assumptions down their throats. I sealed the samples with more force than necessary. When this comes back, and it will come back exactly as we know it will, we're sending them a copy with a very short note. Wilson's smile was sharp. What note? Here's your proof. Now shut up and leave us alone. By Monday, the harassment had evolved into something more calculated. Patricia's emails became apologetic, talking about misunderstandings and family counseling. Richard's voicemails mentioned mediators and compromise. They were clearly workshopping their approach, trying to find the right combination of words that would unlock the door they'd slammed shut themselves. Tuesday afternoon, I was at my desk working when my phone rang. David's school. I answered expecting to hear about forgotten homework or maybe a permission slip. Mrs. Hastings, this is Principal Morrison. I'm calling because David was picked up early today. My blood went cold. Picked up? By who? His grandparents, Patricia and Richard Hastings. They're on his emergency contact list, so I was already grabbing my keys, my heart hammering against my ribs. When did they take him? About 20 minutes ago, they said there was a family emergency and they needed to. Mrs. Hastings, are you still there? I hung up and called Wilson, already running to my car. He answered on the first ring. They have David, I said, and heard something crash in the background as he moved. I'm leaving now. Meet me there. There. Patricia and Richard's house. The estate they had 60 days to vacate. Where else would they take him? The drive took 12 minutes that felt like hours. I ran every yellow light, my mind spinning through scenarios, each one worse than the last. They wouldn't hurt him, they wouldn't. But desperation made people unpredictable, and Patricia was nothing if not desperate. Wilson's car screeched into the driveway seconds after mine. We didn't speak, just moved together toward the front door with the synchronized purpose of parents who know their child is in danger. I didn't knock. The door was unlocked. Arrogant or careless, I didn't care which. We walked in to find David in the living room, surrounded by an obscene display of unopened toys. Remote-controlled cars, video game consoles, tablets, drones, thousands of dollars worth of bribes scattered across the floor like evidence. Patricia was kneeling beside him, her voice honey-sweet. "You see, darling, Grandma and Grandpa love you very much. We just want to spend time with you. Your parents have been keeping you from us because they're angry, but that's not fair to you, is it?" "But Mom said—" "Your mother doesn't understand," Richard interrupted, hovering nearby with forced cheerfulness. "Adults have disagreements sometimes, but you shouldn't be punished for that. You can come visit us whenever you want. All these toys are yours. We can set up a room for you here." A room. In a house they'd be evicted from in 8 weeks. They were trying to build an alternative reality, one where David chose them, where their relationship with him became leverage against the inevitable. "David," I said. His head snapped up, relief flooding his face. "Mom!" Patricia's expression shifted from saccharine to sharp in an instant. "Ellen, Wilson, we were just having a nice visit with our grandson." "You took him out of school," Wilson said, his voice deadly calm. "You are on the emergency contact list. We have every right. You have no rights." I moved to David, who scrambled up and pressed against my side. "You lost those when you traumatized him at Christmas dinner." "We're his grandparents." Patricia's composure was cracking. "You can't just keep him from us. There are laws about grandparent visitation." "Laws that require an existing relationship," Wilson said, already guiding David toward the door, his hand firm on our son's shoulder. "Which you systematically destroyed." Richard stepped forward, blocking the path. "You can't do this. Beatrice is making a mistake. She's old, confused." "She's sharper than you'll ever be," I said, moving David behind me. "And she sees you exactly for what you are." "We gave you everything," Patricia's voice rose, control finally shattering. "We supported you, welcomed you into this family, sent you money." "You mean the money Wilson was sending to you?" The words came out cold. $300 a month for 8 years. "Yeah, he told me about that." Her face went white. "We're leaving," Wilson said. "And if you ever come near our son again without explicit permission, I will have you arrested for custodial interference." "You can't—" Patricia started, but whatever she saw in Wilson's face stopped her. David was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. I scooped him up, even though he was getting too big for it, and he wrapped his arms around my neck like he was drowning. "Why do they hate me? What did I do wrong?" "Nothing, baby. You did nothing wrong." Patricia made one last desperate attempt as we reached the door. "David, sweetheart, tell them you want to stay. Tell them Grandma loves you." "No." David's voice was small but firm. "You don't love me. You just want something." The truth, from an 8-year-old who'd learned to read conditional affection like a second language. We drove home silently, David between us in the backseat of Wilson's car, his hand gripping mine. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he looked up at me with those solemn eyes that had seen too much. "Do I have to see them again?" I kissed his forehead. "Never. I promise. Never." Gregory Whitmore's office moved with the quiet efficiency of people who billed by the hour and knew exactly what they were doing. By Wednesday morning, cease and desist orders had been filed. By Thursday, Patricia and Richard received formal notice that any contact with David outside of court-approved circumstances would result in legal action. By Friday, every school record, medical file, and emergency contact list had been scrubbed of their names. "They won't go quietly," Gregory warned us during a phone call. "People like this rarely do. But you've documented everything. The unauthorized pickup, the harassment, the manipulation. If they push, we push back harder." They pushed. Patricia's attorney, some boutique firm that probably specialized in estate disputes and rich people problems, sent a letter demanding grandparent visitation rights. Gregory responded with a 40-page document detailing every instance of emotional abuse, neglect, and manipulation we documented over 8 years. The letter mentioned the public humiliation at Christmas dinner, the years of favoritism, and the recent kidnapping, because that's what it was, legally speaking, taking a child from school without parental permission. Their attorneys stopped returning calls after that. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday in a plain envelope that contained the most anticlimactic proof of the obvious ever printed: 99.99% probability of paternity. Wilson looked at it for a long moment, then handed it to me. "Your show," he said. I made 2 copies. One for our records, one for Patricia and Richard. The note I attached was shorter than Gregory probably would have recommended, but it felt right. "Here's your proof. Now leave us alone. Ellen." I mailed it certified. Signature required. I wanted them to have to sign for their humiliation. Beatrice called that evening, her voice warm with approval. "Gregory tells me you've been keeping them at bay. Good. Never negotiate with terrorists, darling, even when they're related to you." "The trust is final?" Wilson asked. "Irrevocable as of last week. Even if I wanted to change it, which I don't. It's locked. The estate belongs to you and David now. Well, technically it belongs to the trust, but you understand the distinction." She paused. "Patricia tried to visit me yesterday. I had security escort her out. She's claiming I'm senile and being manipulated." "Are you okay?" "Am I okay?" Beatrice laughed, sharp and delighted. "Darling, I'm 91 years old and I just disinherited my greedy daughter-in-law while leaving everything to my actual family. I'm having the time of my life." The eviction proceeded on schedule. Patricia and Richard hired a moving company and spent their final weeks in the Riverside estate, no doubt calculating everything they'd lost. The house, the beautiful, sprawling house that they'd redecorated and hosted parties in and treated as their own, would be sold. The proceeds would fund David's education, his future, his life. The life they'd tried to price him out of. We found out later they'd moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near the highway. From a 3-acre estate to 900 square feet. The math of consequences. But the real work wasn't legal. It was the kind that happened in a quiet office with a kind-faced therapist named Dr. Sarah Brennan, who specialized in childhood trauma and family dysfunction. David went every Thursday after school, sometimes with us, sometimes alone. "He's processing," Dr. Brennan told us after the 4th session, understanding that the rejection wasn't about him. That's the crucial part. Helping him see that their cruelty was their failure, not his. Some weeks were harder than others. David would ask questions we didn't have good answers for. Why didn't they love me? Why did money matter more than he did? Why do people pretend? "Because they're broken," Wilson would tell him, "and broken people break things. But we're going to make sure you're not one of those things." Slowly, painfully, David began to heal. The nightmares became less frequent. The questions became less desperate. He started laughing again, really laughing, not the careful, conditional laughter of a child who's afraid to take up space. 6 months after that Christmas dinner, I stood at our kitchen window watching David in the backyard. He was playing with the neighbor's dog, his real laugh, loud and unself-conscious, carrying through the open window. Wilson came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "He's gonna be okay." Yeah. He is. The mail arrived with its usual midday thud through the slot. Bills, catalogs, and one cream-colored envelope with handwriting I didn't recognize. The return address was Patricia and Richard's apartment complex. I picked it up, felt the weight of it. A letter. Maybe an apology, though I doubted it. More likely an explanation, a justification, another attempt to rewrite history with themselves as victims. Wilson saw me holding it. "You gonna open it?" I looked at the envelope, then at David through the window. My son who was finally learning that love didn't have conditions, that family could be safety instead of performance, that he was enough, exactly as he was. I tore the envelope in half without opening it, then tore it again, and again. The pieces fell into the recycling bin like confetti, celebrating everything we'd survived. "Nothing in there we need," I said. Wilson kissed my temple. "No, there isn't." That evening, Beatrice called to tell us she'd finalized the last details of the trust. The Riverside estate had sold for $2.1 million. The buyer was a young family with 3 kids who wanted to fill it with noise and chaos and love. Everything Patricia had tried to preserve as a monument to her own importance would become someone else's happy memories. "Poetic, don't you think?" Beatrice said, and I could hear her smile through the phone. After dinner, David asked if we could invite his friend Jordan over for a sleepover. Not a careful request, not checking to see if it was too much to ask, just a kid wanting his friend around. "Of course," Wilson said. "This weekend work?" David's smile was pure sunshine. Later that night, after David was asleep, Wilson and I sat on the back porch with wine and the kind of tired satisfaction that comes from surviving something that tried to destroy you. The DNA test results were filed away in a folder that we'd probably never look at again. The legal documents were signed and executed. The dangerous people were kept at a distance. "Think they'll try again?" I asked. "Maybe. Probably." Wilson shrugged. "But we'll be ready." I thought about Patricia and Richard in their small apartment, about the inheritance they'd counted on evaporating, about David's worth being measured in dollars they'd never receive. I thought about Beatrice's sharp eyes and final words. "Real family doesn't demand proof." "You know what the funny thing is?" I said. "They could have just loved him. That's all it would have taken. Just love him." But they couldn't. Wilson's voice was quiet. "Some people just can't." A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the last warmth of summer toward fall. Inside, David slept peacefully, probably dreaming of dogs and sleepovers and a future where his value wasn't up for debate. Some families are born, some are chosen, and some, thank God, can be left behind. We chose each other every day, and that, it turned out, was more than enough. So Patricia and Richard lost a $4 million inheritance because they couldn't just love a child. Wild, right? If you're Team Ellen and David, smash that like button, subscribe for more stories about people who stood up to toxic family members and won. Comment below, have you ever had to cut off family for your own peace? Where are you watching from? And hit that notification bell, because sometimes the best revenge is just living well. Thanks for being here.